As the crowd continued to grow, the angry mob began to gather around the castle. The old man in the ivory tower said to his worried family, "Fear not. Simply create a story to tell all the farmers that the ones who live in the town are the reason their freedoms were restricted. Then all the peasants will fight amongst themselves." His family grew concerned that people would figure out this obvious deception. The old man smiled because he had played this game before. He knew it is easier to fool the people than to convince them that they had been fooled.
Our society is intentionally being pitted against itself right now. To unravel this story, here's some facts for those who are beginning to question the very real COVID virus, why it's here, and some practical advice for those who see what will happen now and over the next few years. No matter what your beliefs are, temporarily lay down those beliefs and be skeptical to what you see. Our beliefs are nothing more than filters for reality, a coping mechanism to block out what you don't want to hear. Going in as a skeptic gives your mind permission to listen. There are 3 simple questions to ask: why, how, and what. Many of you have been seeing what's been going on for a while, and to be frank, the constant barrage of bad news is no longer beneficial to your mental health. But there's a new crop of people who have started to get an idea of what the world is, and you're frustrated and depressed because it seems like there's nothing that can be done. That is only partially true. To understand what you can do about the world slowly deteriorating in front of your very eyes, you need to be aware of the situation you are in. Why is all of this happening? All of us are in the midst of a war. This war isn't the kind we're used to with traditional rifles and bombs. This war is about information. This is a form of non-violent warfare that has an incredibly high rate of success. People can plan for what they know, but they cannot prepare for something they are unaware of. This information war is in full swing, and we are losing badly. The news you read will be different from the news your friend reads, which is different from the news their friend reads. All of us are operating on a different worldview. Because of this, it makes any sort of meaningful resistance very difficult to materialize. If no one can agree on the actual problem, it makes combating that problem very difficult, as everyone has their own different opinions over the best course of action. This is exacerbated by the global media cartel. If you have dipped your feet in that rabbit hole, you should be aware by now that the entirety of the mainstream media is just another arm of the unelected intelligence community. While this is getting worse lately, it has been this way for over 50 years.
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to the national news services, AP and UPI?
Well, again, I think we're getting into the kind of detail, Mr. Chairman, that I'd prefer to handle in executive session.
Literally everything you see on any mainstream media source, be it news, Netflix, billboards, magazines, YouTube videos, advertisements, or cable TV shows, are controlled and deliberately released to provoke certain reactions from you and everyone else. Virtually everything your mind is consuming. Through this, they are able to control the global conversation. Whatever the media cartel is talking about, we assume everyone else is talking about it. Through the use of repetition, the opinions they present to us we think are everyone else's opinions, or at least the majority.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets are true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 The majority of these media platforms are there for nothing more than to parrot whatever message is demanded by the biggest contributor.
Amazon has transformed its operations in response to COVID-19 to protect employees and keep packages flowing.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy while still delivering those packages to your doorstep. The company is keeping its employees safe. The company is keeping its employees safe. The company is keeping its employees safe. Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
And that is how it works. It's like a house of mirrors, where you're seeing the same thing over and over and over again, except it's distorted.
This division of inaccurate information divides us against one another. The truth is, most of us aren't buying into it, but because the global conversation is constantly talking about the same subjects throughout different mediums, we think that is what other people's beliefs are. We get stuck in a groupthink mentality, something science many decades ago has proven to be very powerful. This has the very unfortunate effect of changing the thoughts and feelings of many people so that they fall in line with the conversation.
The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence. Sometimes we go along with the group because what they say convinces us they are right. This is called informational conformity. But sometimes we conform because we are apprehensive that the group will disapprove if we are deviant. This is called normative conformity. It reveals how people will deny what they see and submit to group pressure. It allows us not only to observe conformity, but to study the conditions that increase or reduce its occurrence.
We are easily manipulated with this process. Until this global manipulative conversation for the mainstream media is silenced, all of us will continue to be operating on conflicting and false worldviews. This is just the surface of the information war that has been quietly humming along for centuries, slowly changing the world and our perceptions of it little by little, until we find ourselves in this current inverse clown world we are in today. Our universities and schooling institutions were among the first to be corrupted.
That you took your kids out of the school. I have been hearing very much the same thing from many parents.
They took 8 and 9-year-olds and made them deconstruct their racial and sexual identity to figure out whether they were an oppressor or the oppressed. 8-year-olds, right? I mean, this is really damaging. Trans education program on these 8 and 9-year-old boys. And it wasn't about support. It was about, we felt like it was more about trying to convince them, like, hey, come on over. And the boys started to get confused. Then our kindergartner was told to write a letter to the Cleveland Indians objecting to their mascot. Now, he's 6.
My kids are not ready to be told they're white supremacists.
The result being multiple generations of people growing up filled with bad information from the earliest possible age, making it harder to overcome even when they see conflicting information with their very eyes. Science has degenerated from a pursuit of data, logic, and reason to a dogmatic edifice of almost religious belief systems. Information has become more abundant, while actual education has done nothing but decline over the decades. The modern human being has no idea where their food comes from, how their laws work, and that their money is based on absolutely nothing more than faith. We live as consumers only given the requisite information to part with our dollars to whomever pulls at our emotional strings the best. We have been manipulated into long workdays specifically because it makes for a purchase-happy public. Keeping our free time scarce means people pay a lot more for conveniences, gratification, and any other relief they can buy. It keeps us watching TV and its commercials, and it keeps us from following our ambitions. We have been led into a culture that has been engineered to leave us tired, hungry for indulgence, and willing to pay a lot for conveniences and entertainment, while we're vaguely dissatisfied with our lives so that we continue wanting things that we don't have. We buy so much because it always seems like something is still missing. We have no idea what we are as a species and have been filled with nothing but bad information that comes apart at the seams once you peel back the layers and apply even a hint of scrutiny. Why don't we know all of this? Why weren't we told in the schools or the media? Because no one is ever going to educate you on how to overthrow them. This has been done on purpose over a long period of time to turn self-sustaining, healthy humans into poisoned, ignorant consumers completely dependent on the institution for their survival. The obvious endgame for this entire endeavor being perpetrated on the humans of the world is control. The uncomfortable truth is not control in the sense you may think. Control in the sense of livestock. Those at the so-called top of our society harvest human energy. Not in some mythical soul-sucking action we see in the movies, it's actually much simpler. In 1971, they have created a medium by which all human energy is measured, fiat money. Prior to 1971, it was sound money backed by gold, something scarce that for now you can't print out of thin air. Once that gold link was broken, it became fiat money that could be created at will by those in charge, and it essentially goes into their bank accounts first at full value. By doing so, they are able to invisibly steal from our pockets through an unnatural means they named inflation. They steal it openly through fees, licenses, and taxes, and covertly through inflation, fractional reserve lending, bailouts, and other complex economic terms they come up with to scare people away from asking questions. If you think just print more money is ever an okay thing to suggest, then I would strongly recommend you stop this video now and instead watch this short explanation about your currency. It is through this medium of fiat money that every human endeavor is measured, and through this medium that every human endeavor can be siphoned. When you create a new piece of technology, a new technique, or provide a service, everything we do, we trade for fiat money. That fiat money all comes from the same made-up source. The people at the top of society have created a concept out of thin air and have tricked us over multiple generations to trade anything of value we create for this illusion. In truth, you never buy anything with money. You buy it with the hours of your life you use to get that money. This is the way that those at the top are harvesting our energy. To accomplish this, they must have control of the fiat money system. To show how important this is, one example can be drawn with the Rothschilds family. They are one of, if not the, richest family on earth. For hundreds of years, they have owned mining, drilling, and banking industries all around the world. In nearly every country on every part of the globe, there's a Rothschilds-owned bank that often controls the money supply. Unknown to most of the general public, the Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express. It is a privately owned bank sitting on its own private land that does not have to abide by US law. The Rothschilds family owns a large portion of the Federal Reserve Bank. In 2000, there were only 7 countries that did not have a Rothschilds-owned bank. Then something happened in 2001 that created a reaction from the US military to bring democracy to the good people of Afghanistan and Iraq. By 2003, these countries had a brand new Rothschilds-owned bank. After an ongoing war against terror and sudden regime changes, by 2011, 2 additional countries were the new benefactors of the Rothschilds-owned bank. Many people assume that those wars were about controlling the oil. But you don't have to control the oil if you control the money that is used to pay for that oil. After a constant stream of new wars that have gone on for decades, there was a lapse of 4 years during the Trump administration without any new wars. Then on President Biden's first week in office, there was an immediate talk about the threats Iran has against our freedom. And on his 36th day in office, he started dropping bombs in Syria on Iran-backed targets. This may give you an idea of how important it is to control the money system. This control runs deep. The reason we need to be controlled is so that the harvest can continue on a controlled population of what is essentially livestock. We are farmed, the same way we farm cows, chickens, or honeybees. Thousands of bees toil for days collecting pollen, but at the end of it all, the beekeeper comes and takes away the majority of the honey created by the efforts of those thousands of bees without a second thought for all of the work expended by them. That is what our world is. Now we are at a point where the livestock population is getting too large and too wise to control effectively. The bigger and wiser the population gets, the more potential there is for unexpected events outside of the control structure of the elite.
Those protests against Wall Street continue to grow across the country today. Here in New York.
In 2011, an uprising began. Groups of hundreds of thousands of people started a movement called Occupy Wall Street, as they saw big banks and financial elites using criminal banking practices to quietly steal money away from every citizen around the world. The intent of Occupy Wall Street was to call out this elite parasitic class. However, those who control the money not only control the governments, but control the media as well. They fought back and used their media influence to misdirect the problem that people were seeing of the elite to a problem of race. The media simply changed the topic of the global conversation, a tactic you'll see again and again. The mention of news about Occupy Wall Street dramatically started to plummet as the cultural problem of racism suddenly surfaced. This turned the cameras off of the elite and pointed the lenses between the citizens. The purpose of setting the population against itself is to deflect everyone from issues that could unite them. A very old divide and conquer technique. With this distraction, a plan that started in 1996 continued in motion. The plan comes with many names. It is put on by a handful of billionaires and powerful groups that have been in the shadows pulling the puppet strings for decades. Among them are the World Economic Forum, in the military-industrial complex.
The acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
These are very powerful people who are openly stating they want even more control. In late 2016, another turn of events happened. American citizens put someone in the White House that had spent 2 decades openly stating he was against the elite parasitic class. It's important to distinguish the differences of the 1%. Billionaires are not inherently bad. However, billionaires who manipulate the government to gain more wealth and power for themselves are the parasite class. In addition to Trump taking office, people of Hong Kong were protesting against China's overtake of their country, yellow-vested patriots of France stood up against their government, and citizens protested in the streets of socialist countries around the world. This new uprising went on for years. At the beginning of 2020, an anti-elite citizen was easily looking slated for another 4 years in the White House. This is a problem for those at the top who are really in power and fearing they could lose it.
And support President Donald Trump. Organizers called it the largest parade in the lake's history.
A major war used to be the ideal way to reduce the population and gain more control, but with today's technology, weapons such as nuclear bombs pose a threat even to the elite parasitic class. So instead, they implement a more subtle way to cull the livestock and merely wait 2 or 3 generations.
Because what we innocently consume could be harming us.
By that time, only a small percentage of the population will be able to meaningfully procreate. Most likely the wealthier that were able to avoid the traps set for the poor, which make up the majority. Because the energy harvesting medium rewards those who are higher producers, this ensures the bottom rungs of society will be removed from the general body of livestock, and more refined energy can be harvested without the wastage of natural resources in order to keep such a large population of livestock alive. Those who say they have as much money as God often feel they have the right to play the role as well. Even with all this trouble of losing control, humans are still useful, for now, but a cull must be initiated. The cull has been in fact going on for decades and is the slow poisoning of the human species. Through poisons, pesticides, aerosol sprays, injected toxins, subsidized additives, and more, the human being is becoming sick and made infertile. This is due to the increasingly large amounts of foreign and toxic substance that accumulate in our body. The result is poor health, increased reliance on medicine, and sterilization. Give an honest look at the amount of unhealthy human beings that are that way because they did or ate something they did not believe to be directly harmful to them. This has been working for decades, but in the last few years, those at the top were losing control, so things needed to move quickly. This actually tipped their hand and now millions of people are catching on to the game. This is the unfortunate reality we are in. It is this way because we choose to allow it. Our current system leads to moral decay because as life gets more comfortable, people indulge in more distractions to avoid pain. Values deteriorate, and in the process, people become more childish and self-centered, resulting in the citizens turning on the democratic system itself, the same system that protects the freedoms they now use in order to tear that system down. Once childish values take over, people no longer want to endure any kind of uncomfortable pain for the sake of greater freedom or prosperity. What they want instead is a strong leader to come make everything right at a moment's notice. They want instant gratification. They want a tyrant. What's happening in America right now and around the world is nothing new in terms of the structure of the plan. It's been used many times in many countries. Hitler is a well-known example. The term Nazi refers to Nationalsozialistische, which is German for National Socialism, a concept where a few rule the many. Contrary to what is now taught in the schools, that is what socialism really is. It's never presented this way, which is why anyone who escapes from a socialist country will tell you that it takes a promise to get the people into socialism, but a revolution to get them out of it. It's always presented as a collectivism ideology, simply meaning that you are less important than the society. You may notice that society is an abstract concept. A concept is not a carrier of life. You, on the other hand, are actual life, and you are by far more important than any ideology or symbol. At some point you may want to ask, do you exist for the sake of society, or does society exist for the sake of you? Collectivism demoralizes society. This ideology always begins their campaigns by saying what words you can and cannot say, and you should feel ashamed for doing so because some group of people might feel uncomfortable. This isn't intended to strengthen those who are weak. The veiled objective is to weaken those who are morally strong. Political correctness has the earmarks of a dictator. It's fascism pretending to have manners. America is not systemically racist, yet we've gone so far as being afraid to use the adjective black when describing a Klan. America has a greater variety of cultures than any other country on the planet. If America was so racist, then how did we elect a black president? Twice. Only a small portion of the population believes there's a problem among the citizens. That small portion creates a distraction from the real problem. They don't seem to realize that when a flag representing your community is flown over every US embassy around the world, then you are not oppressed. We are living in an age where you can build an entire culture around anal sex and gender fluidity, then parade the streets with giant dildos and call it pride. While at the same time, if you say you're proud to come from the people that gave the world Aristotle, Shakespeare, and Beethoven, then you're called an evil racist monster. This push is not conducive for a healthy society, and that's the point. The notion of this transphobic premeditated pronoun abuse soused in white supremacist pancake syrup has the same objective any collectivism dictator wants, which is to remove the freedom for you to express your thoughts. Because everyone who has power knows that is how you take control of the masses and silence your enemies. Yuri Bezmenov, a KGB defector, explained this quite well over 30 years ago.
It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. Exposed to the ideology of the enemy is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standard. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. Your leftists in United States, all these professors and all this, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They will be lined up against the wall and shot.
For one to use this collectivism ideology to claim themselves a ruler over a population, they would first initiate a problem for the people.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Then they get a reaction from the people to do something about it.
Not only was Saddam supposed to be there,
then offer a solution to the problem they created. This is called the Hegelian dialect: problem, reaction, solution. This tactic is used over and over throughout the process of the takeover. The structure of the takeover is simple. Use money to buy, influence, or blackmail highly positioned people in big corporations, politics, and media. Cripple the middle class economically so they no longer have power. Offer a dramatically increased dependency on the government as a relief from the economic hardship created by the government. Remove freedoms one by one, trading them for the promise of money and gifts from the government. Set up a militarized police state to ensure the new normal will be long-lasting. And finally, once the controls are fully implemented and the citizens are dependent on the new system with no means of fighting back, the governments and those really in power will start to remove the entitlements they promised you. After a few years of free money known as universal basic income, there will be an ever-widening gap between the classes. Those receiving the free money will no longer be the poor. They will eventually be reclassified as the useless class. And we all know what is done with something useless. But this is America, right? The land of the free. After hundreds of years, still the #1 reason people come to this country is freedom. That couldn't happen here. Well, the truth is, every country in the world was free. Before, it wasn't. America will only be free if we keep it that way. The structure we are in now has been done over and over to countries throughout history, only this time, America is among those countries, and many people are unaware of the history.
And the president outlined his vision of a new world order in which the US would participate.
There is a new world government coming your way, and they are already making promises of basic income, medical care, and more. You can see the structure playing out. With this new world governance, you will have to give up all your rights and freedoms at the beginning of the deal. Then they promise to deliver their part of the deal after you do all of that. They promise. For decades, nearly every candidate for president has been associated with one of those groups. So whether you voted for Republican or Democrat is irrelevant because they're a part of the same corrupt system of a shadow government. It's like changing the hood ornament of the car that's about to run you over. It makes no difference. However, the citizens will never revolt against those hiding in the shadows if they continue to be fooled by an illusion of choice every few years. A lot of people say they didn't particularly like Trump, but they loved and respected what he did for this country and for the world. His actions showed he is not a part of the shadow government. That's validated even further when you watch the media.
This guy is the worst ever. He is the worst president we have ever seen. Period. He is not only—
The media, which is owned by these groups, berate and brainwash hate towards him year after year. This video isn't about Trump, but he's a good reference because when you see who benefits from a situation, you'll discover the true agenda. Doing so, you'll find that if Hollywood, the media, the major universities, or the news are all saying the same things you believe in, then when you protest in line with their beliefs, you are not a part of the resistance. You are an unpaid worker for the criminal elite. After the first failed attempt at impeachment, to ensure Trump could no longer stay in office, and the many protests around the world abruptly stopped, a virus was released. You know by the name of COVID-19. While the virus is just as real as billions of other viruses we fight every day, the reporting on COVID has been very unethical. This was done to manipulate the population, to force us to live in fear, because a mind full of fear has no room for its own thoughts. Various agencies ensured a large number of deaths to be reported by simply switching the word "of" to the word "with."
Some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. If someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that.
By doing this, the hospitals benefited by acquiring additional free government funding for suggesting the patients may have had COVID at the time of death. Immediately, this was called another COVID death statistic, whether the individual ever had COVID or not. You might say, but I personally know someone who died of COVID. Do you? That's a very serious and legitimate question because I know someone who died of COVID and I know someone who I was told died of COVID are two completely different things. This is used to manipulate people to be more fearful so they'll be willing to give up more of their freedom. As soon as people were becoming wise to the fraudulent death tolls, the number of deaths dramatically dropped, but suddenly the number of COVID cases began to rise.
2,777 COVID deaths
died from the virus.
Global deaths
killed by the coronavirus.
The media simply switched another word, this time from COVID deaths to COVID cases.
Coronavirus cases soar in the U.S.
COVID cases are climbing.
54,000 cases
of COVID cases.
Increase of cases.
Cases of coronavirus continue to rise. COVID case numbers.
Cases of coronavirus.
Daily case counts doubling here in just 10 days.
And we suddenly had a case-epidemic. The increase of cases is simply from incorrectly using a polymerase chain reaction test, or PCR. A system intentionally misused in a way to create a false positive as much as 95% of the time. That's why so many people were getting two tests on the same day from two different places and getting two different results. One reason the PCR tests are inaccurate is that they need to cycle the patient's sample 1 to 3 times. Any more than that, and you're likely to get a false positive. Throughout 2020 across America, as per the WHO and CDC's recommendations, most facilities were cycling the test an average of 45 times. Then all of these false positives they called asymptomatic, which really just means the person isn't showing symptoms because they're not actually sick. When you accurately count the real numbers, COVID is no more deadly than any other coronavirus that we get every year. The only real novelty for COVID-19 is the amount of media attention. The PCR test is so unreliable, this is a glass of Coca-Cola testing positive for COVID-19 live on TV. This is a piece of kiwi fruit, along with berries, a papaya, and an orange in a sterile lab, all testing positive for COVID-19. The bulk of the positive tests are a scam to exaggerate the problem that was created. More tests means more cases in the headlines of the news. Conveniently, on January 20th, 2021, the World Health Organization updated their suggestion and reduced the number of cycles to avoid false positive. Literally on President Biden's inauguration day, as he was praising how well his vaccines are working, the number of COVID cases began to drop the exact same moment the PCR test cycles were reduced. Since then, in the summer of 2021, the FDA announced that the CDC PCR test for the COVID-19 has failed its full review, even at the reduced cycles. Its emergency use authorization has been revoked. It is a Class 1 recall, which is the most serious type of recall. The reason? Too many false positives, which have been the driver for lockdowns, mask mandates, social distancing, and vaccines. The test used to determine the threat of COVID-19 throughout 2020 and 2021 was unable to distinguish the difference between COVID-19, the flu, and the common cold. And it couldn't even tell if the virus was dead or alive. It's estimated that as many as 95% of the cases we heard about never existed, and that there actually was no pandemic at all, which would explain why the number of deaths worldwide for 2020 was no different than any other year. In fact, all the new cases we were told about weren't even coming from new individual people. When the same people go in for the same test multiple times in a week, they get marked multiple times as new COVID statistics. As a result of all the false positives, the CDC was forced to quietly report that somewhere between 94 to 99% of all the deaths labeled with COVID were actually due to old age or extremely sick individuals, and not simply because of COVID-19. According to the CDC's own report, at most, only 6% of the deaths were solely due to COVID. That means throughout 2020, roughly 10,100 people in the US lost their life due to COVID. Now that's a big number to wrap your head around, so to put that into perspective, throughout the world, on average, 240,000 people are struck by lightning every year. The US has 4.3% of the world's population, which means about 10,300 of those lightning strikes would happen in the US. In other words, you are literally more likely to be struck by lightning than to die solely as a result of COVID. You are more likely to be struck by lightning. This is all published and verified data. COVID has a greater than 99% survival rate, so why doesn't the media talk about it? Simple. The media does not work for you. They work for them. If the media actually was concerned for your health, why not spend time each day giving advice on how to improve your immune system? If politicians are so concerned with the lives of citizens, then why do they allow cigarettes to kill 480,000 people every year just in America alone? There are more people dying from cigarettes that don't even smoke than those dying from COVID-19. If our health is of the utmost importance, then why do they give our tax dollars to the sugar processing plants to reduce the cost of an addictive substance put into our foods, which leads to the death of 1.3 million Americans each year? If the government wants to save lives, why do they actively kill 11 million of them annually with tax dollar paid abortions? Yet we're supposed to believe that a virus that has killed 273,000 people, and according to the CDC, that number is actually far less, is a reason for the politicians to suddenly care about our health? And they care about our health so much that they have to forcibly shutter small businesses and lock healthy citizens into their homes? When the police arrest and assault you for exercising in a gym, but allow you a trip to McDonald's for a Big Mac because it's essential, it's probably time to admit to yourself the current authoritarianism we are witnessing has nothing to do with keeping you healthy. So how do those at the top gain more control by pushing a false narrative about a virus? With our compliance. And that starts with a simple face mask. Masks absolutely have a place in society. If you have or are around those with a compromised immune system, then take every precaution. Studies show proper PPE can reduce the spread of a disease in these situations. However, blindly drawing a conclusion that if masks are smart to wear in an operating room, therefore we should always wear them in a grocery store, is a different story, and that inaccurate assumption is being used against society. If you feel sick with anything, stay home for a few days until you feel better. Otherwise, if you're healthy, don't wear a mask. If a store requires you to wear one to enter, shop somewhere else. In psychology, masks are a part of what's called the escalation of commitment principle, where once you comply with one small thing, you're 82% more likely to comply with the next more drastic thing. The mask are the small thing. When you walk around the grocery store, seeing everyone else wearing a mask reinstills the virus on your mind. Your subconscious doesn't understand language. It understands actions and emotions. When you constantly do a ritual of putting on some kind of mask, you are telling your subconscious, I'm the kind of person who wears this, so I must believe that the virus is a real threat. Putting on a mask is not only unconditional compliance to do what you're told, it helps you to fool yourself into believing a lie. This creates what is called the nocebo effect. You're likely familiar with the placebo effect, but there's also a lesser discussed, just as powerful nocebo effect. Proven over and over, this is where our beliefs and fears become symptoms and side effects. During one study, a series of healthy people took a fake pill and were lied to and told it was a type of chemotherapy. As a result of nothing more than their belief, within 6 days, 30% of the applicants who took the fake pill started physically losing their hair. What you choose to believe is incredibly powerful. In early 2020, a collectivism campaign declared you need to wear a mask for the safety of others. This deceitful campaign was untruthful, as their true agenda was aiming for compliance of the population by weaponizing empathy. Masks incite fear. Fear creates stress. Stress raises cortisol levels in your blood, which reduces your immune system, making you more likely to get sick from anything else, which would then falsely be tested as COVID. More tests means more cases in the headlines, which gives justification for additional mandated home isolation and forcing an untested substance to be injected into your bloodstream from the same people who would profit off of you if you were to get sick from that substance they created. The more cases in the headlines will prolong and double down wearing masks while the true virus of fear continues to spread. If you want to stop the spread of the virus, do your part. Turn off the news and take off your mask. The real thing your mask is covering up is a fraudulent banking system.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better.
Just prior to the so-called pandemic, the CDC stated that masks don't slow the spread of any virus. The Surgeon General says masks are ineffective, and there has been study after study after study after study after study after study showing that masks don't do anything to stop the spread of the virus. Breathing in microscopic plastic particles all day from the N95 mask is causing lung and immune problems throughout the country, which are getting falsely counted as COVID. The cloth masks are even worse. Selling someone a cloth mask as a means to be safe from a virus, any virus, is like selling someone a sweater and telling them that it's bulletproof. Not only are cloth masks completely useless at stopping a virus, the moisture from your breath builds up on the cloth and attracts bacteria and viruses in the air, and it has been proven that wearing a cloth mask makes you actually more likely to get sick than if you weren't wearing a mask at all. To understand how ineffective masks are more clearly, the virus is significantly smaller than a molecule of visible vapor.
As you can see, that vape, which has aerosols the same size as COVID-19 or larger, goes through and around a surgical mask. Now, if we take a cup mask and have a good look at it, notice it goes right through the mask easily and goes in every direction. A high efficiency filter material straight through and around. It has no effect on the spread of aerosols. They go everywhere.
The mask can't filter smoke or vapor from blowing everywhere, so they certainly won't stop a virus 100 times smaller from going right into someone's face. It's like putting up a chain link fence to try and keep out a mosquito. Even the better N95 masks say it doesn't work directly on the box. Those who realize that COVID is one of the biggest scams on the global human population are the people who are not wearing a mask. Polls have shown that the majority of those who don't wear a mask are not getting tested. So it doesn't take much thought to figure out where all of these positive tests are coming from. Masks are useless at protecting you from a threatening virus and even more useless during a fake pandemic. Covering your face also removes people's ability to have a sense of independence of who they are. Forcing a child's face to be covered with a mask assists in them being transported undetected and unidentified to anyone. And wearing masks prevents the developing brains of children from seeing any facial cues to subconsciously learn social behaviors. Since everyone is dehumanized, this makes the children an estimated 45% more prone to violence, as they are 55% less likely to develop emotions like empathy. But the biggest problem with the mask is that most people are simply wearing them wrong. If you're wearing your mask willingly, without question, then you are using it to cover your eyes. If you're wearing it reluctantly, without speaking your voice, then you're mistaking it for a muzzle. The masks are a gateway to your compliance with the vaccine and eventually so much more than just forcibly tracking everywhere you go. airlines are openly stating that they will require you to show your vaccine identification papers. It is likely that those who do not receive the vaccine or the many required booster injections will be blamed for any new variant like Delta or Lambda affecting the population.
Fueled by the highly contagious Delta variant and unvaccinated Americans,
is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
This friction within society was all planned, which is why we were all subjects to what psychology, marketing, and sales call priming. Seemingly out of nowhere, the phrase anti-vaxxer was the hot topic on every major media outlet in late 2019, about 6 months before the first case of COVID ever hit China. The reason to create opposition against the unvaccinated has nothing to do with the vaccine or the virus. It's about a digital ID rolled out based on the premise of a need to show proof of vaccination. If the population was all in favor of the vaccine, there would be no conflict and no reason for a vaccine passport. If society was all against the vaccine, then there would be too much resistance and no way of implementing a vaccine passport. You would need to have about 40% of the population to refuse to get vaccinated in order for the 60% to demand their normal way of life returned.
And if you've had both jabs, the Green Pass opens doors, giving you access to restaurants, hotels, and gyms.
I saw a lot of young people that it was for them the incentive to do it. They wanted to come back to life, actually. More than a paper, green paper, just come back to life.
Those who are vaccinated would need to believe the reason their life is altered is because of the unvaccinated people.
I want to take off my mask. I want to be able to live my life with vaccination. And right now, I'm being impinged on by people who say, I don't want to get vaccinated. It's fine, but I want them to maybe have a limitation on where they can go and who
they will become a very loud and angry group, which is the objective of anyone pushing the narrative. If you believe that most basic human liberties should be contingent on taking a product from a giant pharmaceutical company, then you are not liberal, progressive, or left-leaning. You are not conservative or patriotic. In fact, by the original definition, the only word that describes that belief is fascist.
Don't get the vaccine, you can't go to the supermarket. Don't have the vaccine, you don't show it, can't go to the ball game. Don't have the vaccine, can't go to work.
Our full service restaurants to require that all staff members be vaccinated, and also to require that guests who want to dine indoors in our restaurants show proof that they've been vaccinated.
Without intervention, the vaccinated will eventually believe that in order to be granted their life back, they will need proof of vaccination through a digital ID system, one that also tracks everything you do, includes speaking out against those in charge. This removes free and critical thinkers from society, leaving only an obedient class continuously willing to give up any freedom. It will create a perpetual cycle you will never get out of. It's a way to take your rights, freedoms, close your business, and take your wealth, so you become dependent on the government. If you're independent, the government works for you, like it's supposed to. If you're dependent on the government to give you a paycheck to feed your family every month, now the government rules you. Instead of a middle class, you end up only with a government upper class and the lower class dependents. In other words, you have a slave class. In a cruel twist of irony, those who fought to tear down America because of a brief history of slavery will themselves become the slaves. That is the intention of the plan, and it's almost painful to decide which is harder to watch. The current process of a global reset to our way of life as the wealthy and powerful gather all for themselves and wipe out the middle class, leaving nothing but a handful of rich and everyone else poor, or that so many people can't see it happening and think it's about a virus. The Holocaust didn't start with gas chambers. It started with one party controlling the media and deciding what was true, one party censoring speech and opposition, one party dividing citizens into us and them, then calling on their supporters to harass them. It started when good people turned a blind eye and let it happen. In parts of the world, they are already rolling out with the Freedom Pass, the Health Pass, and digital ID QR codes in order to move around the cities.
They told me to go get checked. I went and got checked straight away.
Therefore, in accordance with Section 62 of the Act, either you're getting out or you're going to get locked up. Okay. I need you to comply with this. Okay, if you're not going to comply with it, I'm going to arrest you.
Look at this police over here, not wearing a mask. My sister's arrested for shopping for food with no mask, and there's people walking around with no mask. Look at this! There's my brother on the floor for nothing! People sprayed a 12-year-old! No, fuck off! Get on there! Bring them! People sprayed a 12-year-old!
A perspective from Australian citizens in 2021 tells us the following. The Sydney lockdown has become extreme and downright scary. 6 million people in our city, and our peak case count at the moment is about 200, with 100,000 tested every day. Paranoia kicks in just to go get essentials and exercise. Police are patrolling shopping centers and suburban streets looking to find and arrest people who are interacting, visiting their neighbors, or talking with people around them. You feel like a criminal on the run everywhere you go. You can't even speak out against it, or it gets you banned, shunned, or worse, they come knocking on your front door for a Facebook post.
But it will also use a QR code to generate a health certificate that can be used to prove you're vaccinated.
There are questions about how you will be able to prove you've been vaccinated.
Ticketmaster announced they're requiring proof of your immunity if you want to go to a concert, a football game, or basically any type of event.
Without that, you wouldn't be allowed into the venue.
Just to clarify, you can have a deadly transmissible disease like tuberculosis, AIDS, influenza, chlamydia, gonorrhea, hepatitis, meningitis, or Ebola, and you can go into these bars or restaurants. But if you haven't taken your injection of an unproven experimental drug for COVID-19, then you are not allowed in. They don't ban convicted child rapists from government assistance, concerts, grocery stores, or airplanes, but they're banning all of these things from people who refuse to take a dangerous injection for an illness that 99.9% survive. People are pushing for this. It appears the crowd that has been advocating my body, my choice seems to be the majority of the same crowd encouraging the government and healthcare system to force a vaccine onto the population. There is some confusion when it comes to choice. This is healthcare. This is what a real healthcare system looks like. What most people are interested in, though, is sick care. It's something you turn to when you're sick. This is a sick care system. It is a business. And if you want to contribute to that business, that is your choice. Everyone is going to struggle. However, the beauty of freedom is that we all get to choose our struggle. With your health, you either struggle with discipline or you struggle with disease. Either way, it's a choice. The problem lies is when that choice is removed by fear of the population, allowing the big business of a sick care system to grow so large that they overtake the choice of the population with something like a forced injection. We're being told the vaccine injections won't be forced on us.
She is not an anti-vaxxer. She believes in the vaccine, but that she's trying to have a child. These vaccines have not been studied in pregnant women. She was initially told it wasn't mandatory, but the restaurant changed course, telling her in an email Monday they respected her decision, but we have implemented this policy to maintain a safe working environment and that getting the vaccine is required. At this time, your employment will be terminated.
And I was just like, wow, really? Like, I just worked for you through a pandemic.
But Jacobson's firing appears to be legal. Companies can fire you for not getting the vaccine.
But if you want to have an income, keep a job, open a bank account, get a tooth pulled, or be a part of society in any way, you'll need the vaccine. And multiple vaccines at that. That's not really giving anyone much of an option. And it's a slippery slope that is escalating quickly. Even when you consider herd immunity, the idea of forced vaccines simply does not pass the logic test. If you believe the vaccine will save you, then go get one. And according to you, you should be safe. Therefore, whether or not someone else is going to get sick from a disease should be of no consequence to your safety, as that was their choice not to take the vaccine. If you think somehow you're still unsafe after getting your vaccine, then clearly the vaccine doesn't work, and therefore no one should be taking it. So forcing an injection on someone else on either side of the argument doesn't make any sense, and having to explain why governments and the media are coercing perfectly healthy people to inject themselves with an untested foreign substance in order to win back their basic freedoms is an extremely dangerous precedent. The COVID injection is a new concept for a vaccine, an mRNA vaccine which actually in a way genetically changes your DNA. There is a lot of question about whether or not this is true, so to clarify, in order for a corporation to be listed on the stock market, often making them heavily scrutinized, they have to file documents with the Securities and Exchange Commission. According to the documents provided to the SEC from the vaccine manufacturer themselves, the mRNA vaccine is considered gene therapy. According to the Mayo Clinic, gene therapy is the delivery of nucleic acids into the patient's cell, altering the genes inside the body.
Just to clear up one point, my understanding is that these vaccines do not modify your DNA or RNA.
What we're being told publicly seems to be a little different from what's being said behind the scenes.
But I do just want to make sure that I
I share some caution on this because we just don't know the long-term side effects of basically modifying people's DNA and RNA to directly encode in a person's DNA and RNA, basically the ability to produce those antibodies, and whether that causes other mutations or other risks downstream.
This new vaccine was rushed into production without the standard procedures. After 100 years, the cold is still around, cancer is still rampant, and on average, flu vaccines are only 28% effective. But somehow, in about 8 months, these corporations nearly perfected a COVID vaccine with a 95% effective rate. No evidence to support that claim, no long-term study to see what will happen to us in the coming years, and legally you cannot sue or hold them responsible if something horrible does happen to you. Pfizer and Moderna are the leaders in the COVID vaccine race. Moderna has never made a vaccine before, ever. That's something that usually takes years of clinical testing, and they went from idea stage to injecting needles into people within 8 weeks. Prior to the release to the general public, Moderna did a rollout of 45 trial patients, and all 45 of them had severe adverse reactions, lots of pain immediately after getting the injection. To overcome this inconvenience, Moderna reduced its potency now given to the general public, which is why you are required multiple shots. Shortly after this, they announced the consideration of a Band-Aid type of device that you'll attach to your skin.
You watched lots of people get shipped off to the death camps. Right. I was 14 years old, and I would say that that's when my character was made.
It's notable to mention that Moderna's ownership and interest are that of George Soros, a former Nazi from Germany, and former Microsoft owner Bill Gates, who has ties through Gavi and the NIAID with Anthony Fauci. The Band-Aid device known as the quantum dot tattoo has what are referred to as tiny fangs, which were developed after studying the fangs of a viper snake. These small snake fangs attached to you will slowly inject an enzyme Moderna patented and decided to call luciferase. This luciferase enzyme will be a type of mark on you and going throughout your blood that will be trackable to ensure you are constantly taking the vaccine. This DNA-altering serum is not something you can see or feel, but it is photoreceptive, so you can verify the vaccine with something simple like a smartphone and an app where it will light up under your skin and have a unique pattern just for you, like a barcode. It's assumed and plausible that at some point you'll need this in order to buy or sell goods. This, of course, is for the safety of the public. Most people who are unaware of this will take this new type of vaccine willingly. This is even with a substantial amount of evidence showing that one thing the COVID vaccine and the COVID virus have in common is that they were both created in a lab. The beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper name. The Department of Defense is the Department of War. Socialism is legalized theft. Feminism is the hatred of men. Critical race theory is the hatred of America and white people. Marxism is the hatred of freedom. Hate speech is censorship. And gain of function is the creation of biological weapons. By definition, gain of function is manipulating an organism to increase its effectiveness and transmissibility as a disease. For obvious reasons, this was illegal. However, on January 9, 2017, the Obama administration lifted a block on gain of function research. That took place 11 days before President Trump entered the White House. The following day after the block was lifted, Anthony Fauci said, "The next administration will undoubtedly face a pandemic."
That there will be a challenge, the coming administration, in the arena of infectious diseases, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. The thing we're extraordinarily confident about is that we are going to see this in the next few years.
The most notable aspect of COVID-19 is just how good it is at affecting humans. Coronaviruses begin their infection by attaching their protein spikes, the signature corona sticking out of them, into what is called an ACE2 receptor, found in whatever organism it finds itself in. Coronaviruses have been around for at least 700 years that we know of. COVID-19 is unusual for coronavirus because unlike all other coronaviruses, when tested which species the COVID-19 receptor binded to the best, for some reason, it binded to humans more than anything else, even more so than bats, which is where its supposed origin came from. Meaning COVID-19 entered the world at what appeared to be a human-optimized stage, coming from a lab that was working on increasing the transmissibility of coronaviruses. If someone catches COVID-19 from an unvaccinated person, that tells you two things. One, clearly the vaccine is useless, and two, that's the fault of the people who funded and managed the laboratory that created and unleashed the virus, not the unvaccinated person. If you feel the need to blame someone, then each death is their fault and the fault of those withholding the information of actual cures rather than untested vaccines.
Minutes before air, Lee tells me to drop the sound about hydroxychloroquine because it needs the context of other drugs. The fact that the sound reached the audience's ears at all led to this reaction from Fox bosses Susan Schiller and Lee Meyer.
You need to cease and desist posting about hydroxychloroquine.
Industry executives who are the people who hire us and keep us employed. It's not just about the viewers, it's about what our CEO reads.
Like Lee said, it's not about the viewers right now.
So the truth is that whether anyone likes it or not, regardless of the studies, doctors are secretly prescribing hydroxychloroquine.
We're not going to relive the conversation of hydroxychloroquine. We're just not. You're going to stay as far away from that as possible.
How many of you have turned on a local news station or a national cable news station and ever gotten an update on treatment at home? This is important scientific information to help patients in the middle of this crisis, and social media is striking it down. Based on what authority? And the reason why there was Senate testimony is because there was a near total block on any information of treatment to patients. A near total block. Patients actually think that the virus is untreatable. And
if you have been told that the unvaccinated people are to blame for any variants of the COVID-19 virus, then consider that during the entire year of 2020, the COVID-19 virus barely mutated, according to the media. That was for the entire year. Then, as soon as the so-called vaccines were rolled out, suddenly over just a few months, an entire Greek alphabet of new variants appeared. None of these new variants were prevented by the vaccine, and all of them supposedly as a result of the unvaccinated, even though for 12 months prior, there was no vaccine and no variant. That's a little convenient for those profiting from the vaccine to suggest as soon as they begin selling their drug that they immediately have someone to blame for it not working, and that the ones to blame are the ones who haven't bought their product. There is a substantial amount of evidence, such as a study done in 2015, determining that due to the antibody-mediated viral enhancement, the vaccines are in fact what is causing the dangerous variants. That is a condition when vaccines work wrong, as they did in every coronavirus animal trial ever done. Coronaviruses are in the air all year long, waiting to attack those who are compromised and lacking vitamin D, which in most people happens during the winter, where the days are shorter and people receive less sunlight. It also happens during government-mandated lockdowns where the citizens are forced to remain indoors. You may want to ask yourself, now that millions of people have received a DNA-altering vaccine, why did we have a coronavirus breakout during the summer of 2021 when respiratory viral syndromes don't do that? Respiratory viral outbreaks happen during the winter, every year, unless something were to happen, such as nearly 1 billion people being coerced into accepting a DNA-damaging injection into their bloodstream. Historically, without a vaccine, variants are typically less dangerous than the original. The goal of the virus is to have as many hosts as possible, and in order to do that, it has to evolve in a way that doesn't kill its host. So the natural design of a virus is that they become less lethal over time. That's without any mRNA vaccine intervention. There is also a substantial amount of evidence showing that each mRNA injection you receive reduces your natural immunity, meaning if you once had lifelong natural immunity to COVID and most or all of its variants, the more vaccines you take, the more vaccines you'll need for the rest of your life. There is also evidence showing that those who receive the vaccine are at greater risk of hospitalization or death from a variant. That is why during a 2021 COVID outbreak in Barnstable, Massachusetts, 75% of the COVID symptomatic cases were in fully vaccinated people, and 80% of the hospitalizations from the outbreak were also fully vaccinated. Shortly after this outbreak, the CDC changed their guideline requirements. After this change, according to the CDC, if a patient has been vaccinated, hospitals are told to not register that patient as a COVID case. This is why the media started touting that supposedly only the unvaccinated are filling up the hospitals. Hospitals in other countries were originally finding similar results, that those who are vaccinated are at greater risk of hospitalization from a COVID variant. It actually appears that since the vaccines don't stop the spread and lose efficiency within 6 months, they are creating an endless stream of variants, which in theory would make the pandemic last forever. Cures, such as ivermectin plus long-lasting natural immunity, which actually prevents the spread of all variants, would end the pandemic forever. However, that wouldn't be profitable for Big Pharma. This business model would almost seem intentional. The pharmaceutical industry doesn't make much money on cures. They make money on treatment because treatment, like a vaccine that needs boosters, is repetitive, long-term, and has multiple sales. They also increase their sales when they can give it away for free to the general public because the state and federal governments are using tax revenue to pay for it. We already know with certainty that information on cures was withheld. If you didn't get a chance to read the 2,300 pages of Anthony Fauci's legally released private emails, a quick summary of what he knew from day one is that COVID was man-made in a lab. His gain-of-function money funded it. Hydroxychloroquine is effective and safe. Asymptomatic spread doesn't occur. Masks are completely useless with the virus, and Anthony Fauci was talking with big pharmaceutical companies about vaccines while talking with big tech about censorship of cures. Anthony Fauci's institute, the NIAID, receives money from two sources. The first is by lobbying Congress. The second is from royalty payments from Moderna and various other pharmaceutical industries. Whether you paid directly for your COVID test or vaccine, it was subsidized by the government. People such as Anthony Fauci are profiting a substantial amount of money as a result of the masses believing in a pandemic. This is part of the evidence suggesting those involved with the gain-of-function biological weapon research that led to the development of the COVID-19 virus are the same ones profiting from the mRNA injections. So what is mRNA? mRNA is a messenger ribonucleic acid. The injection delivers a synthetic, inorganic molecule that programs your cells to synthesize pathogens that your immune system will constantly have to fight off for the rest of your life. Your immune system has a limit to what it can handle. Say you're allergic to gluten and also allergic to pollen. A little gluten and you're okay, a little exposure to pollen and you're okay, but too much of one or a combination of both and your allergies flare up. Your immune system simply caps out. More than just allergies, the same happens with infections. Being injected with an mRNA designed to always create a virus in your system can eventually cause your immune system to become overwhelmed and more vulnerable to other diseases. This is otherwise known as antibody-dependent enhancement or immunodeficiency. This makes attributing a death to the vaccine even less likely in the future, as the cause of death will be reported as the various other diseases the patient died from because the mRNA injection is capping out their natural immune system. The more injections you receive, the worse the problem will become. Many people who experience symptoms from the injection immediately are likely immunocompromised already. Everyone else who didn't have an immediate negative reaction from the injection will possibly become immunocompromised. Unfortunately, you can't get unvaccinated, so taking steps to care for your immune system and not receiving any further injections should become a priority. An additional reason to avoid any further injections is that the site where the COVID vaccine produces the toxic spike protein was supposed to be isolated to the injection site in your arm. As it turns out, what we learned from the mRNA data obtained by a Freedom of Information Act request is that within 48 hours of receiving the injection, the toxic proteins are carried throughout your body, including going so far as penetrating the blood-brain barrier, something even a virus can't do. This injected toxic compound accumulates in the brain, the heart, and it shows to have infested other critical organs throughout. Even according to the FDA, the list of possible adverse outcomes are extensive and severe. These deaths and injuries are already being reported, but rarely by the mainstream media. According to the data, the toxic proteins from the vaccine go throughout your body, and for some reason in women, they accumulate most in the ovaries. This would explain why sudden drastic changes in menstrual cycles was one of the main topics on the Facebook group of 200,000 people discussing their negative experiences after the vaccine. Facebook unfortunately banned and deleted that group along with an extensive number of other groups and individuals discussing the same. This accumulation of the toxic spike protein from the vaccine in the ovaries would also explain the abnormal jump in miscarriage rates and what are being called sudden abortions. Normal miscarriage rates are around 10% in the first 20 weeks of pregnancy. However, for women who are vaccinated, miscarriage rates are currently at 82%. This is especially alarming since the CDC's website even states that the vaccine is safe for pregnant women. The vaccine doesn't appear to be safe for anyone since it's already 500 times more deadly than the seasonal flu vaccine. In fact, globally, the COVID-19 vaccine has already killed more people than the atomic bomb dropping on Hiroshima. For both women and men, the other place where the toxic spike proteins accumulates the most appear to be in the bone marrow. This is a major concern as it could lead to diseases such as leukemia and other serious life-debilitating illnesses from taking an experimental injection that never passed the animal trials.
And have you seen any other vaccine that was put out for the public that skipped the animal test?
Never before. Especially for children.
And as what I've read, they actually started the animal test, and because the animals were dying, they stopped the test.
Correct.
Folks, I think that's important to understand there, that that what we're talking about is the American people are now the guinea pigs. This is the test program that's going on. They didn't do the human testing, and they stopped the animal test because the animals were dying. And then they turned it out for the public. And we are now looking at businesses that want to mandate that this experimental vaccine be given to people as a condition of their employment.
It's important to note that in 2009, Pfizer received the largest legal fine in U.S. history when they lost a lawsuit requiring them to pay $2.3 billion for bribing doctors as well as suppressing adverse trial results. This penalty was only a small percentage of the revenue during that time, and doing the illegal action ended up as a net positive for their business profits. Meaning they learned it would be profitable for the company if they were to suppress information from the public, even if they were to get caught again. The belief that any corrupt entity who has done wrong in the past doesn't do wrong anymore is generally based on nothing. It's believed by most people, however, because it's comfortable to believe. With all the adverse reactions worldwide, it's very plausible that many pharmaceutical companies are still withholding crucial information from the public. In fact, Moderna and Pfizer both accidentally lost the paperwork from their COVID clinical trial. Already in the EU, over 1 million people who have received the same injection are currently experiencing side effects, and 500,000 of them are life debilitating, meaning they were living normal lives before being vaccinated. Now they can no longer work and need a caretaker because they can no longer care for themselves after the vaccine. For perspective of that number, that is nearly 3,000 individual entire high school graduating classes who now need daily assistance to continue living in the EU alone simply from receiving the COVID vaccine. The number of deaths and injuries are likely even higher, using a 2009 study as a reference that concluded less than 1% of the vaccine-related deaths and injuries are reported to VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. It is possible that in time we will learn that COVID vaccines will cause more long-term side effects than the COVID virus itself, and it is even plausible that we will learn that COVID vaccine caused more deaths than the COVID virus. In addition, the mRNA vaccine will not prevent you from receiving COVID, and the vaccine will not prevent you from spreading COVID, which is why some people are still getting the vaccine and dying from COVID after being injected. All the clinical trials proved was that the injections reduced the risk of mild COVID-19 symptoms like coughing or muscle pain. That's it. How do we know this? Pfizer, the manufacturer, tells us.
Even a fully vaccinated individual can pass on COVID-19.
Adverse reactions will not be covered by most insurance policies because the insurance companies recognize the injection as an experimental drug, as they have to date failed clinical testing. In fact, even the CDC has noted that the death toll from the COVID so-called vaccine in the first 6 months is greater than all 70 different vaccines ever administered into every human in the last 3 decades combined. Again, more people have died from the COVID vaccine over 6 months than all vaccines combined over 30 years. That doesn't even include the people who died weeks or months after receiving the injection. That's only from healthy people who died within days or hours of receiving the injection. The immediate deaths in humans are a similar result the mRNA vaccine saw while testing in animals. A Johns Hopkins professor noted that 50% of the entire population of adults already has a natural immunity to COVID-19 and other coronaviruses. Long-term studies suggest that natural immunity will last an adult for the rest of their life. However, an mRNA injection will require you to receive another injection into your body every 6 to 12 months, making billions of dollars in profit for the pharmaceutical companies. Pfizer has already been making a substantial increase in profits. They made nearly $19 billion in the second quarter of 2021 alone. Obviously, huge profits came from the COVID injections. We know, however, that common side effects of the COVID injections are dangerous blood clots and serious issues of cardiomyopathy. Pfizer's profits in the second quarter were dramatically increased not only from the COVID injections, but also when their drug Eliquis rose 13% and Vyndaqel rose by an astonishing 77%. Eliquis is used for treating blood clots, and Vyndaqel is for cardiomyopathy. Those profiting from the fear of the virus are also profiting from the treatment of an even deadlier problem they created with the vaccine. For children, the risk of reproductive sterilization and lifelong debilitating diseases seems to be even greater. Teenage boys have already seen a 2,500% increase for the possibility of myocarditis, which can lead to heart failure and death. We have learned that children already have a natural immunity to COVID since their blood contains memory B cells that bind to the COVID virus. The result of these studies found a prominence of early childhood B cells and cross-reactivity for future responses to novel pathogens. Studies have also shown that there is no evidence of asymptomatic spread of COVID through children, so there is no benefit to vaccinating a child as children are not at risk for injury or death from COVID, but are highly at risk for injury or death from the vaccine. In fact, according to Dr. Michael Yeadon, the former vice president of Pfizer, children are 50% more likely to die from the COVID vaccine than from the virus. Regarding studies, here are the studies done to see how the mRNA injections react to other drugs you may be taking. Well, there are none. Here are the studies done on toxicity. None of those either. There are also no studies on genotoxicity to see if these chemicals damage your DNA. No carcinogenic studies to see if the mRNA will cause cancer. No studies to see if it will cause autoimmune diseases. There are no long-term studies because even though hundreds of millions of people have received the COVID injection, we are currently only in phase 3 of the COVID vaccine trial. Unfortunately, anyone who received the vaccine is part of a clinical trial of an unproven drug. If you did not receive the vaccine, then you are in the control group. Phase 3 generally takes 3 years before it moves to phase 4. 3 years in phase 3 is the minimum amount of time the FDA allows to review vaccines for long-term side effects such as lupus, sterilization, autoimmune diseases, and the extensive list that has already been shown associated with the COVID vaccine. This isn't the first time that the WHO, the CDC, the FDA, and the government allowed testing of a vaccine on the general public without the citizens knowing that they were part of a clinical trial that involved them being injected with a dangerous toxic substance. In 1976, some of the mainstream media had journalistic integrity and alerted the citizens of the problems with the safety recommendations from the government officials.
Well, 46 million of us obediently took the shot. And now 4,000 Americans are claiming damages from Uncle Sam amounting to $3.5 billion because of what happened when they took that shot. By far the greatest number of the claims, 2/3 of them, are for neurological damage or even death.
Dr. David Senser, then head of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, is now in private industry. He devised the swine flu program, and he pushed it.
Was X53A ever field tested?
I can't say. I would have to...
It wasn't.
I don't know.
Well, I would think that you're in charge of the program. Did anyone ever come to you and say, you know something, fellas? There's the possibility of neurological damage if you get into a mass immunization program?
No.
No one ever did?
No.
Did you know ahead of time, Dr. Hatwick, that there had been case reports of neurological disorders, neurological illness, apparently associated with the injection of influenza vaccine?
Absolutely.
You did?
Yes.
How'd you know that?
By review of the literature.
So you told your superiors, the men in charge of the swine flu immunization program, about the possibility of neurological disorders?
Absolutely.
What would you say if I told you that your superiors say that you never told them about the possibility of neurological complications?
That's nonsense. I can't believe that they would say that they did not know that there were neurological illnesses associated with influenza vaccination. That simply is not true. We did know that.
You didn't feel it was necessary to tell American people that information?
I think that over the years we have tried to inform the American people as fully as possible.
I told Judy to take the shot. She wasn't going to take it, and she never had shots. And I'm mad with my government because they knew the facts, but they didn't release those facts because if they had released them, the people wouldn't have taken. And they can come out tomorrow and tell me there's going to be an epidemic, and they can drop off like flies next to me. I will not take another shot that my government tells me to take.
Due to this journalistic integrity, in the late 70s during the swine flu outbreak, the vaccines were halted after 12 deaths were reported. In 2021, in just the first 6 months of the vaccine introduction, we are already over 10,000 confirmed deaths in America alone.
The vaccination program ground to a halt from coast to coast today. There have been now 12 reported deaths so far, with victims dying just a few hours after receiving those inoculative shots.
And still, politicians, the media, and corporations are pushing the vaccine onto citizens, even so desperately trying to give the vaccines away as quickly as possible that they are offering lottery tickets, cheeseburgers, and joints. This vaccine should not be approved. If it does, then many will begin to see the corruption of the FDA and other bureaucracies come to light. In 2020 and early 2021, it has what's called EAU, or Emergency Use Authorization. In order for it to have the EAU status, one of the requirements by law are for there to be no other approved treatments. For a pharmaceutical company to profit billions from an unapproved vaccine, one thing they would have to do is simply discredit any other treatments. A combination of hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and vitamin D have shown to be a very likely cure for the man-made COVID-19. In fact, for a cure to normally be taken seriously by the medical community, they would need a case study that is peer-reviewed. For hydroxychloroquine and other treatments like ivermectin, there are literally over 300 peer-reviewed studies for these drugs. These studies prove overwhelmingly they are extremely effective at treating infections like COVID-19 and its variants. The drug ivermectin appears to have a very high cure rate based off literally the most scrutinized standards of a peer-reviewed drug trial completed in the spring of 2021. Ivermectin has been used for decades and with a proper dosage has been shown to be extremely safe. Using ivermectin on COVID-19, it appears to not only prevent a person from getting COVID, but it also cures them as well if they already have it. The only downside with ivermectin is that the patent ran out over a decade ago and the average prescription cost $12, meaning it's not profitable. This is a main driver why cures such as ivermectin are being suppressed. Many doctors are unaware of ivermectin being a likely cure. Does this mean that doctors are nefarious or ignorant in some way? No. It has to do with liability. Most are not allowed to speak out even if they know about it. When a hospital runs a treatment, they generally follow the guidelines of the NIH, the WHO, or the CDC. That reduces the legal liability if something goes wrong with the patient. Going outside these guidelines is a big risk. That means all the doctors and nurses in the hospitals and clinics throughout are not even told something such as ivermectin is an option, and generally are not allowed to use it for treatment even if they are aware of it. They are following the official channels and protocols. Hospitals are not run by doctors. They are run by administrators who answer to a board of directors. Without turning a profit, the hospital would no longer be around. So avoiding lawsuits and billing the insurance companies as much as possible is common throughout the industry. That again isn't saying nurses and doctors are bad or corrupt. Even the hospitals aren't necessarily bad or corrupt. In fact, you only need a handful of corrupt people to prevent the safe and proven treatments such as ivermectin from being out in the public while pushing an unproven yet profitable vaccine on the citizens of the countries around the world.
More breaking vaccine news just before 7 o'clock this morning. Pfizer announcing that new results from its vaccine trial showing that this vaccine now 95% effective, up from 90% from initial data that they released last week. Also comes 2 days after Moderna reported its vaccine was 94.5% effective.
The so-called 95% efficiency rate touted by the pharmaceutical companies was misleading to say the least. A peer-reviewed study by The Lancet confirms the vaccine efficiency of 95% reported by the vaccine manufacturers was referring to relative risk reduction, rather than absolute risk reduction, as would be standard. Your actual risk of reduction of getting COVID after the vaccine has then been reduced by 1.2% with Moderna, 1.2% with Johnson & Johnson, and by less than 1% with Pfizer. Meaning after you receive the vaccine, on average, you are 99% just as likely to get COVID. This raises 3 questions. By getting a vaccine, how would you be helping other people? If you have natural immunity, as 50% of the population likely does, why would you still be required to get the vaccine? And if the vaccine doesn't stop the spread, why would you need a vaccine passport? Once you've applied a moment of critical thinking, you'll find anyone advocating these requests is either uninformed, irrational, or has an ulterior motive for suggesting everyone should be vaccinated. Let's summarize this by crunching a few official numbers. The Pfizer NNV is 117, meaning 117 people need to be vaccinated to prevent one COVID case. That's to prevent a COVID case, not a COVID death. Since the median survival rate of the virus itself is 99.86, that means 999 out of 1,000 cases survive. So you would need to prevent 1,000 cases to prevent one death. That means you would need to vaccinate 117,000 people to save one life. By the first half of 2021, about 134 million people in America have been fully vaccinated. So far, 10,355 people have died in the first 6 months of 2021 in the US alone. That means 56 people a day are dying immediately after receiving the vaccine. Due to underreporting, that actual number of deaths is likely significantly higher, and officials and CDC whistleblowers estimate it to be at 51,800. But we'll continue with the officially released numbers. 134 million people vaccinated divided by 10,355 official deaths from the vaccine results in 12,940. This means COVID vaccines kill, at a minimum, 1 out of every 12,940 people that are vaccinated. So if you vaccinate 117,000 people to save one life, 9.04 people would die from the vaccine. When you average all the age groups, you find that you are 904% more likely to die from the COVID vaccine than for it to save your life. That's bad enough with the official deflated numbers. With a more likely estimate of 51,800 deaths, that means you are 4,520% more likely to die from a COVID vaccine than to be saved by one. And the likelihood of developing a lifelong debilitating disease is even greater. In addition to the harm on the individual, there are two major concerns about the COVID injection when it comes to society. First, this causes a reduction in the diversity of the gene pool. Essentially, you could say an mRNA injection makes an adjustment by attaching a receptor to a specific protein on your DNA. Currently, when any virus or disease spreads throughout society, some people may become ill or die while others don't. Among other things, this is because of the diversity throughout society where some people have a receptor for a virus and others do not. When everyone lines up to receive a similar mRNA vaccine, that reduces the diversity of the gene pool in society. This open receptor could then be exploited as a kind of backdoor to any virus, whether developed in a lab or created organically by nature. Either way, without any gene diversity in society, that virus would have the ability to wipe out an entire species. So using COVID-19 with a 99.8 survival rate as an excuse to do an experiment on billions of people leaving us vulnerable for a mass extinction doesn't seem wise for the continuation of a species. One has to ask why other countries such as China are not using an mRNA vaccine, but in the West, such as America, it's being pushed onto its citizens. If you've already had a vaccine, you can rest assured that your DNA is now changing. If you don't like the sound of that, then opposing society's pressure and saying no to further injections will help minimize its effects. The second societal concern about the rush to an experimental COVID vaccine has to do with getting back to normality. There is a very loud subset of people who don't want the pandemic to end because they like the attention for being the best at following the rules. They are also handed the biggest microphone, which extends the belief of a pandemic to the masses. As a result, there are other people out there that are allowing an injection of an experimental drug fully knowing the risk of potential reproductive, neurological, and autoimmune diseases. This is not a game. These are serious risks that go even beyond our health. The societal concern is that millions of people are already willing to do anything to get back to normal in a more familiar way of life. By doing so, we discover there is a steady escalation of requests. We are significantly beyond the notion of just 2 weeks to flatten the curve. The constant stream of fear from the media keeps us jumping through any hoops as we navigate shortages of basic supplies and new terms like social distancing designed to make us live in fear of our fellow citizens. We're constantly reminded of the virus by wearing a mask on our face at all times. Then we're told everything will be back to normal if we just lock ourselves in our home. Then, so long as we get a vaccine, we'll be all safe, even though the vaccine is experimental and hasn't passed any animal trials. Actually, one vaccine isn't enough. Just one more and then you'll be safe. Even though vaccines can't stop the spread of COVID, for some reason we need proof of our vaccines in some form of a vaccine passport in order to continue to be part of society. We begin to question if our actions are pushing the idea back to normal even further away, as it seems to be dangled in front of us like a carrot on a stick. Many start to have concerns of the vaccine as they hear millions of people are getting sick and countless are dying immediately after receiving the injection. Unfortunately, it won't be until multiple shots, then boosters and quarantine camps and further extended lockdowns until most people realize that it is too late and that this is not a game. Back to normal will not happen if we continue to simply comply. Rather, compliance is feeding the machine. The current structure of the vaccine will not end the threat of the virus. That is a feature, not a mistake. Aside from the mRNA vaccines, the concept of a traditional vaccine is very rational. Many people think that these vaccines make a lot of sense. That is, until they research the data. There are conspiracy theorists out there that believe a group of powerful shareholders making billions of dollars from people being sick are actively trying to cure them. When was the last time you went out to buy something from the pharmaceutical industry when you were feeling fine? Vaccines, however, are a way to profit off of healthy people. One question to ask someone advocating for a vaccine is, why are you standing up for the big pharmaceutical industry? The FDA does not test vaccines for safety. The vaccine manufacturer tests the vaccine themselves, then chooses what data to provide for approval and what data to sweep under the rug. This is acceptable since the FDA and the CDC mandate and approve vaccines, but they get paid by the vaccine manufacturer. The details of the testing are beyond the scope of this video, but as with everything else, source links are provided. The bottom line is that to make billions of dollars, they need approval. And for that approval, they have to check their own homework. So as you can imagine, the testing they give themselves is extremely manipulated. You may think that vaccine manufacturers would go out of business from lawsuits if they were selling something harmful. They would. However, in 1986, vaccine companies were no longer responsible for any harm. They set up an entire court system just for themselves in order for the US government to compensate the parents of children for damages arising from a vaccine-related injury or death. This made vaccines very profitable when they no longer had to pay out any lawsuits. The lawsuits are settled in a rigged system where the defendant and the judge are both the US government. Anyone that actually does win did so with so much compelling evidence that the vaccine caused injury or death that literally no one could deny it. To date, there has been so much undeniable evidence that vaccines are harmful that the US government has used your tax revenue to pay out over $4 billion in lawsuits on behalf of the vaccine manufacturers. In addition to the lawsuits, there's a high correlation between vaccines and death. Even with an amazing healthcare system, the infant mortality rate per country puts the United States in 33rd place, below Latvia and the Slavic Republic. A notable difference between the United States and Japan at the top is that Japan does not mandate any vaccines, whereas in America, the US government requires 28 different vaccines to be injected into a newborn baby. Among the states in America, there is one place with the highest infant deaths, Mississippi. Unlike other states, Mississippi does not allow religious exemptions and therefore has the highest vaccination rate in the country. Obviously, it is unwise to blindly correlate without skepticism as other factors play a role. But there is a statistical fact that countries and states who vaccinate more have more babies die, and at a minimum, that is worth investigating. Some vaccine injuries don't present themselves for months or years after the vaccine. Autoimmune diseases, a very profitable disease for pharmaceutical companies, happen to have increased the same time vaccines started becoming far more prevalent after 1986, when they were no longer liable for lawsuits. Since then, in one generation, type 1 diabetes has increased 21%, Crohn's disease has increased 70%, systemic lupus has doubled, Guillain-Barré syndrome has doubled, and multiple sclerosis has increased over 400%. Vaccine companies don't appear to be creating cures. Conveniently though, they do seem to be acquiring more profitable customers. Collectivism ideology uses guilt to tell us we must get vaccinated to help stop the spread and save the lives of other people, like those who are vulnerable and can't get the vaccine.
We will be reunited with our friends and family. All we have to do is just take the vaccine.
This is false. Traditional vaccines use live viruses, and those receiving the vaccine can then spread the virus to other people, especially to those who are vulnerable. This is called shedding. In fact, a major study showed that at least 8 out of 10 vaccinated children can spread the virus they were vaccinated for up to 14 days. Why only 14 days? Because the study only lasted 14 days. Vaccines have one purpose: to prevent a disease. Yet most vaccines are not tested to see if they prevent the disease because it would take too long. The HPV vaccine Gardasil is supposed to prevent cervical cancer. However, the average age of a woman who gets cervical cancer is 50. So when vaccinating a child for that, you would have to wait decades to see if it actually works. So children are currently being injected with something that has not been proven safe, and it is decades away from even knowing if it will work. There's also a lot of evidence to show that vaccines don't prevent disease. For one of many examples, in March of 2003, a measles outbreak occurred in a boarding school in Pennsylvania with over 600 students. 78% of the students who got the measles had been vaccinated for the measles. When given a few years of information, vaccines often look like they reduce many diseases. However, a 60-year sample tells a very different story. The number of deaths from diphtheria in the United States from 1900 to 1963 decreased dramatically. The vaccine for diphtheria came out in 1920. Whooping cough came out in the 1940s, the polio vaccine in 1955, and measles in 1963. Notice the trend how the diseases were already going away, and the biggest spikes were after the vaccine was introduced. Typhoid and scarlet fever didn't have a spike because there was never a vaccine during this time. They followed the same trend though. So why were all these diseases declining long before pharmaceutical companies started selling us vaccines? The answer is obvious when we overlay this one other line of data. This line represents the rate of Americans without indoor plumbing. meaning the more Americans that were receiving clean indoor water and better sanitation, the fewer diseases we had. Which is why other parts of the world without indoor plumbing still have all the diseases America used to have, despite all the vaccines they are receiving. You don't need to dress up like this to go pick up your groceries. All you need is to take a shower and maintain proper hygiene. An unpublished study from the CDC done in 1999 showed that due to the mercury, vaccinated children were 500% more likely to have sleep disorders, 210% more likely to have speech disorders, and there were 760% more children with autism that received the vaccine versus those who didn't. A study in 2012 found children vaccinated with the flu vaccine had a 440% increase in respiratory infections. In studies done in 2008 and 2010, they found children vaccinated with hepatitis B had a 300% increase in autism versus those who were not vaccinated. And they found that vaccinated children had a 900% increase in the rate of needing special education services. In the last 10 years, the vaccine industry made an estimated $592 billion. In that same time, an estimated $400 million has been donated to politicians from the pharmaceutical industry, with an additional $2.3 billion spent on lobbying. And the media received an estimated $39.7 billion from the pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceutical companies don't spend tons of money on drug ads during their news cycle just because they want to sell you Abilify for your schizophrenia. They do it to ensure the news is always reporting in their favor. They're not paying for the ad. They're paying for what's being said between the ads.
Are anti-police, pro-criminal, and overwhelmingly elected with George Soros's money, and they're a major cause of the violence we're seeing because they keep putting the violent criminals back on the street.
I'm not sure we need to bring George Soros into this. I was going to say you get the last word, Speaker.
He paid for it. I mean, why can't we discuss the fact that millions of dollars he spent?
I agree with Melissa. George Soros doesn't need to be a part of this conversation.
Okay. So it's verboten.
All right, we're going to. Okay, we're going to move on. A historic day.
However, most people who are unaware of this will take the vaccine willingly. Vaccines are a business. The CDC is not a government agency. The CDC is a private company and it profits billions of dollars off of royalties from the vaccine patents. Bill Gates said getting into vaccines has been the best investment of his life. It has doubled his fortune from $50 billion to $100 billion in record time. Just like with Microsoft Windows and Microsoft Office, switching your business model from a one-time plan of a traditional medicine to an annual subscription, like a vaccine, is very profitable. But that's only a fraction of where the money is to be made from this fake pandemic.
COVID-19 has hit all businesses hard.
It's tough to sleep at night. You can think about it every second of the day.
The fear constantly pushed by the media about COVID-19 is used to justify lockdowns. The lockdowns cause depression and suicide. Forced lockdowns close small businesses. Small businesses employ more than half of the population in America. Well, they did prior to 2020. During the first wave of lockdowns, many large corporations whose doors were allowed to stay open profited billions, while the combined total of all small businesses of hardworking citizens not only didn't make any money, they actually lost money. The same people who are championing the lockdowns are the ones profiting from them. This elite parasitic class is not only immune to the fake pandemic, they have been thriving on it. While during the same time, over 500 million people were pushed into poverty. That snowball has already started, and from 2021 through 2023, you'll see billionaires grabbing up failed businesses, apartment complexes, and homes for pennies on the dollar, just like they did for years at the beginning of the first Great Depression. All of this is going on around the world as a result of government-enforced lockdowns using a fake pandemic as their justification to get away with it. If you give someone in power the right to break the law during an emergency, then those wanting more power will always create an emergency to allow themselves to break the law. When you wear a mask, you show your compliance, and your compliance adds to the forced lockdown problem, and the next wave of lockdowns will crush the families of those who are barely holding on. From 2021 through 2030, we can expect a dramatic escalation in the agenda. This escalation will likely come in waves where everything seems as if it's okay for a while, then there's a new problem. That new problem could be something such as a cyber attack that temporarily takes down the power grid in most parts of the internet, leading to another shortage in the food supply. Then, after some time, that will calm down, but the solution to the problem will be to increase restrictions online to verify everyone's identification. Ultimately, this is to further silence the citizens from speaking out. Then, after a series of events, we should expect another major wave of COVID variants, along with waves of lockdowns. As that subsides, it would again bring additional restrictions. Without any influence by us, it's plausible in the next few years to expect these events, along with a likely economic collapse, possibly culminating in a major war by the end of the decade. This wave pattern brings us, the subjects, right to a breaking point before relieving the pressure. It allows a gap to forget the previous hard time and accept it as normal, which reduces the threat of building a resistance. With every new problem comes more restrictions. This pattern provides an opportunity for the most effective way to demoralize a subject, making them exploitable to give up their rights for a sense of security, while channeling them to a modified, more controlled way of living.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. Building back better means getting support to the most vulnerable while maintaining our momentum on reaching the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs.
The third foundation is to build back better.
To think that life can go on as it was before the plague, and it will not. This government will build back better.
We can build back better, and I'm looking forward to getting started as soon as we can.
On January 20th, 2021, Biden was inserted into a system to further push an agenda of forced lockdowns, forced vaccines, forced tracking, censorship, an upcoming new system of money, and an overall major reduction in your freedom. We actually should stop looking at it as a removal of freedom. What it really is government enforced pain. The substantial amount of science and evidence shows that this isn't a government that Americans elected. Even 30% of Democrats believe the election was stolen. Whether you voted for Trump or Biden, you should always encourage a fair and honest voting system. Without it, we easily invite tyranny, just like other countries that have used the same glitchy voting machines. In the future, maybe voting will be removed entirely, in a good way. In truth, even with an honest election, I don't have the right to choose who rules my neighbor. Nobody does. However, at this current time in our evolution, this is what we're working with. So at a minimum, we can applaud those who stand up for it to be a fair and accurate count. As Buckminster Fuller put it, democracy is the worst kind of government, except for all the others.
Congress is back in session and Democrats are pushing to pass gun control laws.
Dozens of new laws take effect tomorrow, among them some controversial ones.
One of the first changes we can anticipate in a very near future will be gun control. The criminal elite can't have the population armed because, unlike the rest of the world, the American people actually have a fighting chance to stand up for themselves and their freedom. With a Biden-Harris administration, you can expect extreme gun control laws to further the agenda of the elite. There has been a big push to ban guns the last 2 decades. One has to wonder if the only reason why someone in power would want to disarm the citizens after 240 years is because they intend to do something so bad that you would feel compelled to fight back. Gun control has never been about protecting the citizens. Gun control is about protecting the powers of the government, the powers of the big corporations, and the powers of the criminal elite. When you support restrictions on guns, you are supporting more restrictions on you. Free people have access to guns. Slaves don't. The class of people who would benefit the most from banning guns are criminals. The only people who will turn in their legally owned guns are the exact people society doesn't need to worry about. You can't expect to throw all of the guns in the world into a giant volcano and assume that murderers everywhere will immediately cease. Violent criminals are a result of a structural failure of society. The number one factor for violent crime isn't race, it isn't poverty, it isn't IQ, it's growing up without a father. The absence of a father brings non-parenting men around the house, and those are more likely to be abusive to the child. Child abuse plants the seed of a violent criminal. The welfare programs blindly handing out checks not to those in need as charities would do, but to those who fit the requirement, such as no father, is then nurturing a system of children born out of wedlock by forcibly taking citizens' tax dollars to give them to mothers of fatherless children, making a society that encourages the growth of violent criminals. Most minorities are good people who would not want to forcibly take money from other people who work hard for a living. However, the biggest tax bracket comes from the middle-class white citizen. That is why propaganda such as white privilege is pushed onto the public so that the feeling of empathy and guilt is removed when collecting money. The white privilege campaign implies the minorities are not taking from someone else, rather they are simply taking back what should be theirs. This increases the welfare state, thus increasing violent criminals. Increasing violent crime increases the opportunity to remove guns from the citizens. Guns are simply an inanimate object used to project society's failure. Most guns are not used as a weapon. They are used as a shield to protect citizens from a government overreaching with power. The governments say they want to save the people by removing assault rifles because of mass shootings, despite the fact that in the first 6 months of 2021, more people have died from the COVID vaccine that the government is pushing than from all of the mass shootings over the last 6 decades combined. Yet the government is literally offering pot, cheeseburgers, and lottery tickets to entice people to get the injection, while at the same time they are fighting desperately to disarm you of your means to protect yourself from the very government pushing these deadly injections. The BLM riots were a part of what's to come. Seeing how all the BLM fundraising went to the DNC for the Biden campaign, it can be presumed that BLM stands for Biden laundering money. Either way, this was not an organic grassroots plan 6 months prior to the 2020 election any more than it was 6 months before the 2016 election. During these riots, BLM started a slogan called Defund the Police. Not kill the police or pigs' lives don't matter. They went with Defund the Police. Defund is not a hip and cool word for the individuals that they're looting in the streets. Rather, defund is something very bureaucratic. There is no red button to delete massive government entities, but defunding is an action that is very viable from a paperwork standpoint. Reducing the size of the police makes rioting and looting a lot easier for those unpaid workers of the criminal elite. Eventually, enough innocent bystanders want the government to protect them and call for some kind of National Guard to come into the streets. That slowly removes the police from 50 individual states and consolidates all the power under one roof to be controlled by a few. Maybe those pushing the agenda know that history shows that when peaceful protests gain the support of local police departments who see that what they are told to enforce is wrong, things begin to change. When the police join side by side with their friends, family, and neighbors in these protests, all good citizens and the country as a whole have a 60% greater chance of dismantling a tyrannical government. People spend a lot of time, as they put it, trying to wake up the sheep. Maybe we could spend more time informing and joining forces with the police and begin waking up the lions. Many people are trying to warn us about this, but they're being censored as they speak. Large tech corporations such as Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Amazon, Google, YouTube, and Apple, who ironically built a company with an anti-1984 message of tyranny, are all censoring people who are speaking up against government-inflicted pain. By using these platforms that are censoring the people, you're relinquishing your freedom of speech to big corporations and media. The same media not only censors the current truth, but manipulates it as well. As an example, in a 1998 edition of the Oxford Dictionary, fascism was defined as a system of government marked by dictatorship. Today, when you search for a definition of fascism, it seems a little one-sided, with an authoritarian and nationalistic right-wing system of government. When that same media changes the definition of words, also actively censors citizens around the world, including the President of the United States, you'll quickly realize their true power, and then you may realize the same big tech has your fingerprints, your facial scans, your passwords, your likes, your dislikes, your health, your beliefs. They track where you are at all times, and they're recording everything you say. You may not like President Trump. You may think of him as an idiot, a racist, a fascist, or all three depending on where you get your propaganda. Consider though that he was the only world leader on the planet that has been completely silenced. The world's most brutal dictators and state sponsors of terrorism can speak on any and all platforms. But Trump, someone adored by millions of citizens all around the world, was silenced by these groups who aim to gain more control over you. This censorship, now dressed up as fact-checking, did not exist until the truth started getting out. When you tear out someone's tongue, you are not proving them a liar. You are only telling the world that you fear what they might say. We were told to believe that a small subset of the hundreds of thousands of Trump supporters protesting the election results on January 6th turned violent and stormed the Capitol building. It's a little convenient that the group dressed as Trump supporters were waved into the Capitol building by the police. Many of them also happen to be Antifa members participating in the BLM riots just months prior.
And blood left here on the ground where people have pushed past this barricade. You can hear them getting louder, cheering.
Our nation's capital fell under siege by domestic terrorists. Yes, that's what I said, domestic terrorists.
Domestic terrorists.
Domestic terrorists.
This obviously staged false flag is now being used as a part of a baseline to warrant new laws that are said to combat the domestic terrorism problem we have in this country. In reality, it's just more government-enforced pain. There is a solution to this problem, and it's been in place for over 200 years. A well-armed militia of citizens must stand their ground when the government begins to overreach. When riots were getting out of control in Democratic-run cities across America, the citizens of Boise stood their ground while Antifa and BLM agitators were bussed into town allegedly to start a riot. This is the same Antifa that is financially backed by George Soros, one of the owners of the COVID vaccine provider, Moderna. In Boise, without a single shot fired, every potential violent protester backed off and within a few short hours left the city. There is no looting, no rioting, no burning buildings, no police state, and no government intervention because the citizens stood up for themselves and their neighbors. When you stand your ground, do so firmly but peacefully to avoid falling into another trap, and hopefully we won't be goaded into an actual civil war. It's important to realize that this is a war, and the harsh reality is that there are powerful people who prefer that you are not alive tomorrow. There are people who want more control, and that comes from you giving it. Many of these people have openly stated the planet is overpopulated and it needs to be reduced.
First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
They have stated that when they have enough control, they can get the population down to what they believe is a more sustainable quantity of people. So what can you do about it? There are two answers to the question, what can you do right now? One answer is practical, while the other is a little deeper. It is very likely that the silent majority is a collection of people left, right, and center who have lost respect for nearly all politicians and are rejecting the corporate media narrative.
Also interesting is, remember, it's illegal to possess these stolen documents. It's different for the media. So everything you learn about this, you're learning from us.
It is also very likely that this silent majority is much larger than we're led to believe. Otherwise, there would not be a need for thousands of armed military to guard the politicians. Either way, things are in motion that we are going to have to endure. Whether you keep your dollars under the mattress or in the bank, they will become worth less and less each year. The US dollar has already lost 97% of its value since the Rothschilds Federal Reserve Bank was created in 1913. That loss of spending power escalated rapidly after the dollar was converted to fiat money in 1971, where politicians could print dollars as much as they wanted.
The Federal Reserve announcing now that it will do $1 trillion of repo every day for the rest of the month.
The demise of the dollar is about to see an even more rapid decline. What this means in real-world terms is that you're going to have the same amount of money, but everything you buy is going to cost you a lot more. Now, if the dollar and other fiat currencies are falling apart, how can the elite continue to harvest your energy?
The Great Reset is a welcome recognition.
That brings us to what's referred to as the Great Reset. The US dollar is now entering the same fate all major currencies have succumbed to and soon will no longer be the dominating currency on the planet. When studying the trends, it appears the goal is to completely destroy the value of currencies and economies all around the world in order to create a single world-dominating currency ruled by a select few people. By doing this, those at the top would have substantially more control. Much like in Venezuela, Zimbabwe, the Weimar Republic, and Yugoslavia, it's possible we will see the euro, the US dollar, and many others completely collapse either this decade or next. That will be another new problem. There will be a reaction, and the solution will bring rise to a new world currency. This could be anything, but will likely come from the International Monetary Fund in the form of an SDR, and it would be a new type of digital currency. This would be your new money. Unlike something controlled by the people such as Bitcoin, their proposal is with a digital currency controlled by the banks and the central elite, which is no different than the digital dollars we have now. Among other things, the appeal of Bitcoin isn't that it's digital, it's that it's decentralized. Bitcoin is spread amongst the people and can't be created out of thin air for a select few who own all the money. If the global financial system were to run on some form of currency that can't be manipulated or reproduced, you would immediately see over 90% of the wars come to an abrupt end. Removing the option of creating an endless stream of money removes the option of creating an endless stream of wars. That's why in President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, the word missile appears 19 times. The word weapon appears 46 times. The word munition appears 46 times. The word aircraft appears 208 times. Healthcare appears 24 times. Doctors and nurse appear 5 times. And mask appears none. For those who have any kind of savings now and are concerned, Bitcoin, Monero, Ethereum, Cardano, and other cryptocurrencies, as well as physical gold, physical silver, and hard assets would be a wise investment, at least for now. Everyone keeps saying all of these things keep going up in value, but in reality, the dollar keeps going down. It would be a good idea to reduce your dependency on food from the grocery store. Start a small garden in your yard, or organize one with the community. This will provide not only a community support system, but a safety net for you and your family. If you can, get off the grid. People will be surprised not only if the grid goes down, but how long it can stay down. Start taking small steps towards improving your health. Consider building your immune system with the following COVID treatment: government corruption, media manipulation, sex trafficking, harmful food modification, poisonous fluoride in your water.
Hazmat crews were called to the Rock Island water treatment plant for a chemical spill. The chemical hydrofluorosalicylic acid is used to add fluoride to the plant's water.
Regardless of your political belief, all of this is real. It is happening, and it's affecting all of us. The bitter pill to swallow is that chances are you can only change your own actions and look out for yourself and your direct loved ones. Let's not assume that the world is going to be saved by Trump or aliens or Elvis or whoever you have been told by someone else that it might be. The reason for this being that the beekeeper has a vested interest in the hive continuing to function and can easily remove bees that are impeding that. You need to change what you are doing. If you don't like how a company treats their employees or how they treat the environment, then stop giving them money. The more we support alternatives, the more alternatives we will have. The economies of the world run on feelings. That's because people spend money on things that make them feel good or take away pain. Where money flows, power flows. The more you're able to influence the emotions of people in the world, the more power you'll accumulate. People who believe in this fake pandemic are in an emotional state of fear. That emotion will drive their decisions to give their money and freedoms to the billionaires who exacerbated the problems in the first place. Voting in the electoral system has obviously become a sham, but you still vote with your dollars every single day. What you purchase and who you give your dollars to is your daily vote for how you want the world to be. If you don't like how Twitter and Facebook are censoring people you want to listen to, delete your account and stop using them. There are alternatives that welcome people to share ideas and think for themselves. Do you want corporations to stop spying on you? Change your Gmail account to a Proton Mail account. Ditch your Chrome browser for Brave. Highly recommended.
It typed in the words Hillary Clinton, CRI. Google's autocomplete function automatically filled in Hillary Clinton crime bill and crisis. Do the same on Bing or Yahoo, you get Hillary Clinton criminal.
You don't like how Google manipulates your search results? Use another search engine. DuckDuckGo or Quant.com are great alternatives to Google, especially if you want privacy and non-manipulated search results. Don't like how people are silenced on YouTube? Use one of the many other platforms besides YouTube. You'll find a lot more information on topics YouTube apparently doesn't want you to see. Better yet, pull away from all of these distractions and do something else. Until we start making changes in our own lives, and until we actively fight the information war and learn about all the processes we take for granted, the world will not change its current direction. That means being conscious about your consuming choices and being conscious about how you treat other people. This change in you will extend to those around you. Once you start making efforts to better yourself, then focus additional efforts on telling other people about the corporate media information war. Until that terrorist is removed, we will all continue fighting amongst ourselves while we are slowly being crushed and harvested. If you're inclined to be one who really stands up, then begin educating yourself now. Crowd psychology is a weapon. It's time we pick it up and start using it. Educate yourself on information such as The Crowd and Psychology of a Revolution by Gustave Le Bon. When the time comes, leaders will emerge, and it will be better to have multiple leaders across the country and the globe. That way, while going against the system, when one leader is removed, 3 will pop up in their place. If it comes to it, that will give us a chance, and now is the time to start preparing.
Claims that he was brutally attacked because he was wearing a Make America Great hat again.
As a result of how we've been programmed to attack each other, there's a lot of self-censorship of people who have truly good intentions. For those of you who realize your window of opportunity is closing quickly, speak your mind, speak it today, and speak it with compassion. Right now, people are scared and lost. They don't need to be yelled at. They need encouragement and inspiration. Be patient with them. Abruptly telling them a stark contrast is too great a leap in consciousness. Doing so would encourage further retreat rather than pulling them out of the darkness. When you struggle trying to explain something about COVID, mask, or vaccines to someone, they are not rejecting you, the data, or the logic. They are rejecting rejection. Because no matter how great the evidence, they subconsciously know that if they agree with you, that means that they will later be rejected by their friends and family for having an unconventional opinion. This is difficult for most people, and that is the problem to overcome and the reason to be patient. Humans are not designed to pursue truth. We are designed to pursue reproductive survival, and being ostracized from our tribe reduces the odds of our survival. If during the conversation someone gets angry, that is a different situation. The moment someone shows anger in a conversation is the exact same moment they ceased striving for the truth and have begun striving for themselves. Your information is opposing a belief they have linked to their personality, and that information is now a danger to their psyche, and they are no longer willing to accept it. When people switch the conversation to, "You're a racist," "You're just an anti-vaxxer," "I'm offended," or they get angry with you in any way, it's because deep down, they realize that you know what you're talking about. The natural reaction to this is to feel inferior, and the weakest type of people react to that which is in themselves with anger. They do this so as to not validate the feelings of weakness. At that point in the conversation, it's best to stop making points and instead just start calmly asking open-ended questions. They may continue to be angry, but later on, the questions they can't answer will become the seeds that begin spreading their awareness to accept an alternate reality to their own. Your questions inspire them to learn. Instead of trying to convince them, let them discover the truth for themselves. More than any meme you can post, your actions will be the inspiration that most need to see. This takes courage because the greatest fear in the world is the opinion of others. The moment you are unafraid of the crowd is the moment you are no longer their slave.
And yet another variant of COVID-19 has been detected in the UK.
When we are told yet again some variant of COVID has arrived and we are required to do more lockdowns, give up more basic rights and freedoms, decimating the lives of people everywhere, simply ignore it. That's what citizens in other parts of the world are doing, and it's working. It's been said that when you lock people away who are sick, that is quarantine. But when you lock people away who are well, that is tyranny. If a law is unjust, it is the responsibility of the people to disobey that law. And wherever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and institute new government. When you hear the propaganda that you should wear a mask for other people, there is actually some truth to that, just not in the way you'd expect. You're not being told to wear a mask to protect them. You wear it to keep others conforming as well. By wearing a mask, you're reinstilling the groupthink mentality in those around you so they continue behaving the same. Rather, when you leave a store that is forcing you to wear a mask, politely telling them you'll simply shop somewhere else, and when you have the courage to walk around without one covering your face, then your courage inspires others to do the same.
In the previous experiment, the naive subject stood alone against the group. In this variation, Ash gave the naive subject a partner, here seated in the third position, who also gives the correct response.
1, 2.
The partnership variation shows that much of the power of the group came not merely from its numbers, but from the unanimity of its opposition. When that unanimity is punctured, the group's power is greatly reduced.
When we're told to stay in our homes, don't go outside, and be fearful of everyone around us, if you feel that is unjust, then simply ignore them. Go outside, open your store, enjoy the sun, enjoy your right to live. Dissidence is walking away from a generally accepted theory or opinion from an official party. Social distancing sounds better than what we've been doing, since social distancing is nothing more than a politically correct term used to isolate us from one another.
I never thought I'd see a day where hardworking Americans are criminalized for trying to make a living supporting their family.
The dictatorial attitude toward California residents while dining in luxury, traveling, keeping his business open, and sending his kids to in-person private schools is very telling about his attitude toward California residents, his feelings about the virus, and it is extremely hypocritical.
Law enforcement officers all over the country are speaking out against the wrongful actions our state and federal governments are doing. Many sheriffs have shown their courage to openly stand against the unlawful and unconstitutional mandates restricting the rights and freedoms of people across the land. They have shown they will ignore and disobey these oppressive mandates and won't comply with this government-enforced pain. They believe the men and women of this great nation are not incompetent and that we can choose to be afraid, stay home, and sleep, or we can choose to wake up, be with our family, our friends, and our loved ones. The last thing a tyrannical shadow government wants is for the people to peacefully ignore it, because the moment we begin to ignore them is the exact same moment it's been realized that we have all the power. Others only have the power you give them. Rights are not something bestowed to us by the government. You are born with them naturally. The government's role is to protect the freedom of the people, not to pretend to protect the people from themselves. A federal, state, or city government that believes that citizens are nothing more than weak children who can't think, manage, or experience life on their own is a government full of egos with a moral compass that is cracked at its foundation and needs replaced. The situation in this reality appears hopeless, because if we continue doing nothing, it is. You may not be any more interested in politics than I am, but this generation needs to pay attention to its politics so that the next generation can enjoy science, then the generation after that can enjoy music and art. It's likely that you, personally, are going to have to engage in this problem in some way. Hope is not a strategy. This situation we are all in has been crafted over generations by powerful people that are playing to win. Start by being mindful of the choices you make every day, inform other people, and talk with your local police officers. Unless we can win the information war while standing together to peacefully disobey, no greater victory will be coming for us. That's the practical advice. Harsh, but true. Now to take a hard turn to finish with a different message. For those of you looking for the deeper meaning in the longer term game, remember that everything happening right now is all very positive. A lot of people are going to struggle now and over the next many years. That is good because struggle equals growth, if we allow it to. We cannot control what happens to us, but we can always control how we react to it. Many of us have become complacent in life. You are here for a reason, and it wasn't to plug into Netflix all day. Part of that reason is to have experience and to grow as a being. People who get through this struggle in a positive way will be wiser, more humble, and in better spirits all around. The long-term bigger picture is that we don't want to continue to fight the old system. Using tactics of this current failing society to fight the same failing system may help win a battle here and there in the short term, but will get us nowhere in the long run. To make real change, we will need to build a new system that makes the existing system obsolete. With tools of automation rapidly coming, a system of self-governance would be an ideal start for a new society. One without our current colonial top-down structure that was born from a foundation of the military, rooted in money, power, and corruption, but rather use the structure of a horizontal society like the Iroquois thrived off of for far longer than America has been around. This horizontal society will not fare well in a war, but with a resource-based economy using artificial intelligence and automation, the likelihood of having a war decreases exponentially. For thousands of years, societies have been in a defensive posture preparing for war, and instead this shift would be an offensive posture of prolonging peace. Simply hoping for a better system to happen is not the route to take. Hope is wanting the state of the world currently to be something different, making hope by its very nature destructive. While this change is going to take place on its own, hoping for it is not the aim. The aim is accepting what currently is while making changes in yourself that align with the new system. When we stop hoping for a different world by trying to change other people, and instead focus on improving ourselves, we begin to see change happen for the better throughout the world through our actions. You will accomplish far more in this world by being a better person rather than forcing someone else to reform. It's rare for one person to change the world, but not so rare for one person to pass along the message that can change it. Your positive growth becomes that message of change for others. Learning to accept the state of the world now is a big step for your growth. If you're having trouble with the fake pandemic, you're going to have a terrible time with the upcoming global economic collapse, the likely major online cyber attack, and potentially new tyrannical world government. A more harmonized and balanced system will eventually happen, but first, the mindset of humanity will go through a paradigm shift. When learning to accept our current reality, it helps to understand that what we call evil is not bad. We are currently in a universe of duality. Everything has a natural opposite in order for it to exist. The idea of righteousness and evil or good and bad are human concepts. They are not universal. Evil is not good or bad any more than the negative side of a battery. Without a positive and a negative on a battery, you get no charge. Nothing will happen. Good and evil are simply both necessary for us to feel different experiences. You cannot have good without bad any more than you can have up without down. Without darkness in our life, we could not see how bright we can become. Without ever having experienced frustration, we would have never smashed a coconut onto a rock, and we'd still be clawing at it with our fingers. Without this struggle today, you would not learn how incredible you are tomorrow. Right now, we are all falling very far towards the edge of darkness, and we are resisting it. Many of us will fall deeper with fear and anxiety, while others will swing hard to the other extreme of willful ignorance and malice. When you learn to experience both from the center, when we accept and become grateful for the evil in the world in the same way we are grateful for the good, then we are no longer resisting and we begin to find peace. Improving yourself is the first step. The so-called evil is going to be there regardless, if only it were as simple as removing a small group of people from the world for the darkness to dissolve. From experiments with the Global Consciousness Project and the Schumann Resonance, we've learned that our thoughts, feelings, and information coming from our individual bodies are intimately connected to one another throughout the world. Yet so many of us are feeling a disconnection right now. Whether you are religious, spiritual, agnostic, or however you see yourself, we can all agree there's a feeling of so-called evil prevailing in the ether of the winds. It flows through the anger, the fear, and the despair radiating off nearly every single body right now. You can feel it just going to pick up your groceries. But the hub of this fear is not in some distant, unknown ivory tower. The line between good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. The hopelessness, the trepidation, it creates a darkness that vibrates inside of us. That darkness has been sweeping broadly and severing connections. But all of the darkness in the world cannot overcome the light of a single candle. You are the one that will make the difference. What you do will affect the world. Be that candle whose light extends far beyond the required 6 feet. Be the light that lifts the spirits of those around you. The easiest way to pick yourself up is to lend your hand to someone else in need. Start with a simple step today. If you can, buy the groceries of the person in front of you. Send food or a small gift to someone, even a stranger, who needs it even more than you do right now. Recognize the things you do have and feel gratitude for them no matter how small they seem. For decades, we have been bombarded with negativity. As a result, we are in our current situation because the state of this planet is a reflection of our collective thoughts. So talk with others about what's really happening and begin to make the changes within yourself to be the light shining in today's darkness. If this message resonates with you, then share it with those you care about the same way someone shared it with you. Our world is what we make of it, and this is our time to make the change. The hand of fear has been placed on our back, but we still choose the path we take.